Latin America countries have different situations on economy, but similar politics issues. About that, we listen to the chief economist at CME Group. I'm Luciane Miranda, and this is São Paulo Direct by Dukascopy TV. And let's talk again to Blue Putnam, chief economist at CME Group. What can you see in politics in Latin America?
Well, you know, political risk is always a big thing for global investors. And of course, we have an election in Brazil, and we'll find out who wins very quickly. In Argentina, there's an election a year from now, and I think everybody's looking forward to that. So the political situation, though, is quite different in, when the timing. But for the most part, global investors just want an answer. They're not as caught up in, who wins as getting through the election and having a calm period afterwards.
Talking about these politics risks here in Brazil especially, things change a lot, very fast.
Yes.
And investors are very afraid about it, isn't it?
Well, particularly in Brazil, you've had the opinion polls weren't very good, apparently, in terms of who was leading and who wasn't. And so that adds to the uncertainty. I mean, from my perspective, I'm, 5,000 miles away, and it looks awfully close. But again, the main thing for investors is not so much the outcome as the resolution. That is, who wins takes over, the government is stable, the policies go on, the central bank does whatever it does, and there's a lot of reduction of risk. So we're going to be in a much better place for Brazil by early 2015 than we are today in October.
What about the FX opportunities here in Latin America?
The opportunities in Latin America are quite different from country to country because the economies are really different. We have commodity prices around the world are slowing down, are declining. China's slowing down. So, like if you're Chile and you produce copper, that's not so good. But Brazil is not helped either because a lot of the agricultural prices around the world are also lower. So the current commodity environment is a little bit of a negative for Latin America as generally a commodity exporting zone. But on the other hand, Latin American monetary policies, the way the central banks have managed things, are all pretty good. They're not the same from country to country. But the currencies, at least in my view, have a very good chance if we get a little more stable world next year. U.S. grows, China stabilizes, maybe even Europe doesn't go down anymore. That sets an environment up in which you might see a little currency strength in the Latin American currencies in 2015.
But talking about forex opportunities,
Yes.
What can you see? Which countries can offer best rentability?
Well, the first thing you have to understand about buying currencies in Latin America is the global situation needs to be relatively calm. That is, equity markets can't be falling because when equity markets around the world are falling, people get scared and they sell things that they think are risky. And that would include Latin American currency. So you got to wait for the equity markets to stabilize. But once that's happened and people are comfortable globally that it's a little calmer situation, then they start looking at countries that have high interest rates, particularly higher interest rates than their inflation rate. And this is where Latin America gets very interesting because like Brazil has about a 5% premium short-term rates over inflation. Mexico has no premium at all. So if you're looking at that, you're going to choose, some people will choose to buy the Brazilian real before they buy the Mexican peso. Even if both countries had equal growth rates and, things like that, the interest rate inflation would tilt toward Brazil. Now what may happen, if I'm right about that, which you never know, but the Brazilian real, if it were to get a little stronger in 2015, that would allow the central bank here to lower rates very quickly. Whereas Mexico, they already have low rates, 3 or 4%. They can't lower much more. So there's the opportunity for Brazil to lower rates and for its currency to gain a little strength is actually much larger than the other Latin American countries.
What about Argentina, which has a peculiar situation?
Well, Argentina is complicated. That's for sure. There's a dispute between the Argentinian governments and the U.S. court system and some hedge funds about the status of the way they reconstructed their debt. That is a problem for Argentina. It's also a problem for U.S. courts and world investors to get that solved in some way. But because it's in the U.S. court system and it's also the Argentine government is involved and you have the hedge funds involved, we don't know what's going to happen and how that's going to get resolved. But it's actually not that big an issue for the country. We can make too much of it. It's easy to write about it in the press. But really, what needs to happen in Argentina is the global markets have to be a little more comfortable with the government, and that's probably not going to happen until their elections, which is October 2015. Argentina is also a commodity exporter. They export a lot of soybeans and things like that, and so with global agricultural prices lower, they have some headwinds from that situation. So, I don't think Argentina is in as difficult a situation as many people think, but it's still not going to get better for at least about a year.
In your opinion, which country here in Latin America offers less risk?
Well, less risk is a hard concept, but they have different risks. So Brazil probably is the country that has less risk for the currency once the election is over and we're into 2015. Mexico would have a little more risk for the currency, but the stock market looks pretty good in Mexico because it's closer to the United States. If the U.S. stock market can recover, Mexico can benefit. Mexico is importing natural gas at very cheap prices from Texas and the United States. They're benefiting from that. So Mexico has some benefits, say, in the stock market that Brazil might not have. Colombia is a little more rapidly growing country, but the political risks there are very, very different. They have a whole different terrorist thing to worry about, but they've got that under control, or at least it seems that way. So they have a little faster growth. So again, that's a good place for foreign investment. Chile, their problem is copper, and then copper's problem is China. And China's still decelerating. Copper is very volatile, but has a tendency to fall when the world is not growing so fast. So Chile is probably the most risky, if you will, of the investment places for that quick summary anyway.
You talked about the stock market. Where can you see the better opportunities in Latin America?
In general, back in 2010, 11, 12, the U.S. stock market was viewed, and European stock markets and Japan were viewed not as good as emerging market stock markets. And then in 2013, there was a shift back toward the United States stock market, because the United States stock market went up like 30% in 2013. This year, it's going to be lucky to be flat, So I do see the pendulum swinging back toward riskier assets from the global perspective, and that will favor Latin America. But typically, Latin American stock markets also need their currencies to be stable or increasing a little bit. It's a combined effect of currencies and stocks. And so we'll see how that works. But I think Brazil is very favored. Again, because of the high interest rates here, they can be lowered if there's stability in the currency. And so that would make Brazilian stocks also a very good possibility.
Blue Putnam, thank you so much for joining us on Dukascopy TV.
Thank you very much.
Luciane Miranda to São Paulo Direct by Dukascopy TV.